Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I'm SocietySucks and today I'm checking out the Middle East agrees Iran must fall by war fronts. This much is pretty obvious. Iran has been attacking all of its neighbors, so it's no surprise they want them gone.
Day 19, ladies and gentlemen. And look, if you thought this war was simply going to smooth itself out in a few days, well, you've got another thing coming.
I don't think anybody expected it would be over quickly.
Carried out what in all likelihood is the most consequential strike of the entire campaign, besides the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself on the first day. An Israeli strike in the early hours of March 17th killed Ali Larjani, who was both reported to be the architect
Israel
of the
is
crackdown
very good
this
at
year, and was largely
eliminating
calling the shots in the country since
all the
war broke
leaders.
out. Meanwhile, Iran's response to this war
Very
has managed
efficient.
to achieve something truly remarkable. Its own neighbors, who had previously gone to bat for them, are now done dodging missiles and are reportedly pushing Washington to eliminate the Iranian threat for good.
Something that also needs to be said. After the revolution in Iran, the goal of Iran was to spread the revolution to its neighbors so that they can follow in Iran's example. Iran has always been an enemy of its neighbors. And, you know, there's reasons why so many Iranian-sponsored terrorist organizations are all over the countries of the Middle East. I mean, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They don't exist just to fight against Israel or disrupt shipping.
Destroying the tools of repression. Ali Larjani was, by most accounts, one of the most powerful men in Iran after the death of the supreme leader on February the 28th. While the country officially has elected a new supreme leader, Mushtaba Khamenei,
Is he even
his
alive?
whereabouts remain unknown. He hasn't been seen in public since the attacks began. Rumors
So he
have
might
been
be dead.
swirling that he was variously injured, knocked unconscious, or even killed in the weeks since, and in his absence, the Revolutionary Guards have stepped in. He also became infamous in the country through his role during the January crackdown that reportedly killed as many as 36,500 people in 2 days alone.
2
But
days?
he didn't act alone there. He was assisted in that crackdown by...
I also heard that Iran has executed, I think, 3 prisoners from those protests that happened in January. So they're still executing those people. They're still eliminating them.
Gholam Reza Soleimani, who commanded the Basij, the dreaded paramilitary force embedded
He's
in
also
neighborhoods,
dead, I
mosques,
think.
universities, you name it, all across the country. Between the two of them, they were the men most responsible for keeping the Islamic Republic from coming apart at the seams. In the early hours of March 17th, Israeli strikes killed them both. That kind of loss would be devastating under any circumstances, but the timing here matters
Just keep eliminating the
enormously.
Iranian
Since
leadership.
the war began, American and Israeli forces have been running what amounts to a parallel campaign alongside
Eventually
the
they
more
won't have anyone
headline-grabbing
left.
strikes on nuclear sites and missile infrastructure. This campaign has been aimed squarely at the regime's domestic repression capabilities and infrastructure, and it's been accelerating massively in recent days. These targets should tell you something about what this part of the campaign is actually designed to do. Destroying missile launchers and stockpiles might degrade Iran's ability to hit back, but destroying a law enforcement station and the men who run it degrades Iran's ability to keep the lid on a country that had only barely had a grasp on before all of this kicked off. Now, there's an important caveat here, before we get too carried away with assessments that the regime is in imminent danger of total collapse, just
Not yet.
because of these 2 strikes. Much of the IRGC and Basij apparatus had dispersed into civilian areas since the strikes began. Soleimani himself was reportedly hiding in a Tehran paramilitary tent camp when the strike found him. What's more, the provincial core structure that the guards were designed around was built precisely to survive this kind of decapitation, with semi-autonomous units that can operate independently, even if central command goes dark. Destroying their physical infrastructure and their top leaders absolutely does matter, but it doesn't automatically mean that the rank and file have lost the ability to do their job. Whether any of this may be enough is a question that may start being
And that's why
answered
you just have
really
to keep
soon.
killing them.
At the time of recording, it's Shahar Shanbeh Suri, a traditional fire jumping festival that dates back thousands of years, and Iranians across the country are defying regime warnings to take to the streets with bonfires and fireworks. Early reporting from the celebration suggests that the celebrations are widespread and that crackdowns are already taking place. In the Chitgar district of western Tehran, videos are circulating of sustained gunfire as security forces moved in to disperse the crowd around bonfires, with plainclothes agents conducting arrests on the spot. Similar clashes have been reported in Karaj and Mashhad.
Once again,
Now, we'll keep our eyes on what
just
happens
like
there.
January,
But
hey?
what comes in the next few days is going to be the real test. Nowruz, or Persian New Year, falls on March 20th this year. This holiday is historically one of the largest
That's
public
tomorrow.
gatherings in Iranian life, and has often been a flashpoint for protests against the regime. Last year, they arrested dozens of people across multiple provinces.
I don't think any Iranians are really going to protest. They may hate the regime, but they're not fools. They know that if they protest, they will likely be dealt the same fate as the protesters in January who were killed en masse.
During Nowruz, and that was before any of this broke out. This year, suffice it to say, the situation has changed a bit. We don't want to rest too much on Nowruz as a make-or-break moment, though. But it nevertheless represents a significant test of the coalition's core theory for ousting, or at least seriously pressuring the regime. Degrade their tools of repression enough and the population will be able to do the rest. That is how they envision being able to topple the Islamic Republic without an Iraq-style boots-on-the-ground operation. But the people who actually control the scene on the ground, the men with guns, if you will, are operating on a very different theory. The clearest window into that came in early March, when President Pezeshkian publicly apologized to the Gulf states for uncontrolled missile
Yeah, they keep apologizing, but then they keep striking anyway.
A sensible step in the right direction, given that none of the Gulf states were attacking Iran. Right? Well, no, not quite. The IRGC ignored him, continued to hit Bahrain, the UAE,
Exactly.
Qatar, and elsewhere throughout the region, and reportedly were furious.
Iran is a country run by terrorists. Their words mean nothing.
That the president
Their
would publicly
actions
back
do.
down from the fight. The significance for the domestic picture here is hard to overstate. The Guards have never been a domestic military force, but instead an ideologically driven group of hardliners explicitly set up to defend the Islamic Republic's continued existence, no matter what the cost. Whatever comes next on the streets of Tehran, it does not appear likely that these men will simply lay down their weapons and go quietly into that
Definitely
good night.
not.
A tough neighbor. The IRGC's hardliner stance did not just reveal the power dynamics going on in Tehran, though. It helped to reshape the entire region's posture in ways that would have been difficult to imagine just a few weeks ago. Before the war started, the Gulf states were the closest thing that Iran has to a coalition against American military action.
That's
Despite
true.
hosting US bases, most of them had adamantly pushed the White House not to strike Iran and were actively working
And
to
then
try and
Iran
find
started
common ground
striking
between
them.
Washington and Tehran so they can avoid conflict. While this was partially out of self-preservation interests, they knew the conflict in the region is never good for their bottom line, at least in the short term, they were still some of the best friends that Tehran had left. The Emirates had spent years rebuilding its relationship with Iran, and Oman's foreign minister was in Washington discussing the matter with Vice President J.D. Vance the day before the strikes took place. None of them doubted that Iran posed a threat. They hosted US bases for a reason, after all, but they calculated that living with the Iranian threat would be preferable instead of being largely defenseless in a war. Iran's response to Operation Epic Fury settled that debate in about 72 hours. Since February the 28th, Iran has launched over 1,800 projectiles, split between ballistic missiles and drones at the UAE alone. The Fujairah
just
Oil
the
Industrial
UAE.
Zone, one of the
Wow.
largest oil storage hubs in the Middle East and home to pipelines specifically built to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, took direct hits. Dubai International Airport, meanwhile, was forced into flight delays after a drone strike near its fuel tank sent passengers fleeing through smoke-filled corridors. The scene across the Middle East has been largely the same, while US air defenses.
This will make me sound like an asshole, but Iran striking targets across all of its neighbors and just overall the whole Middle East is actually a good thing. Especially if they're striking civilian targets, because that way all of its neighbors, especially the civilian population, starts despising Iran. And once you piss off enough people, it's over. See, if enough civilians in a country have a certain opinion on Iran, they want them gone, eventually the government will no longer be able to ignore those people, especially once they become the majority. They will have to do something about it, otherwise they risk civil unrest.
Have been able to intercept the majority of what Iran's sending their way. Some have gotten through. And while that has been going on for nearly 3 weeks at this point, what's far more noteworthy is the reaction throughout Gulf capitals in the last few days. Perhaps the most revealing moment came in an ABC Australia interview with Emirati Minister for International Cooperation, Reem al-Hashimi, who went viral for calling the strikes almost unhinged, as they are targeting civilian infrastructure. When the interviewer pushed back, pointing out that it was the US and Israel who started this conflict and that the Emirates were being targeted because they host US bases, al-Hashimi didn't mince words. Independent of how this began, the retaliatory measures that Iran has taken to attack the Gulf states is really where the issue we have is. Our relationship with the United States doesn't falter in moments of crisis. we don't take to trying to be bullied around. End quote. Bahrain
I like
took
this
even
woman.
further, branding Iran treacherous. Bahrain even took the lead in sponsoring a UN Security Council resolution condemning Iran for its targets in this conflict, which passed with unusually lopsided support. While not everyone throughout the Gulf was quite as forceful as that, they've all been moving in the same direction. The GCC has formalized this shift, invoking the UN Charter's Article 51 right to collective self-defense and explicitly reserving the option to respond militarily. But behind the public statements urging peace, the private messaging to Washington has been far more direct. Finish the job. Gulf officials have been pushing the Trump administration for what amounts to a permanent end to Iran's ability to threaten their infrastructure, and while this doesn't necessarily mean full regime change, it does center around absolutely crippling the country's military capabilities for a long, long time to come. But let's step back
Iran
and
has
consider
already
what's
been
going on.
crippled for decades
In
at
the
this
space of 3
point.
weeks, Iran has managed to turn every Gulf state that was lobbying Washington on its behalf
How much more
into
does it
a
have left
partner
to target?
actively backing the campaign to destroy its military capabilities. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most self-defeating foreign policy decisions a country has made in the modern Middle East. The choke point. If the diplomatic picture is bad for Tehran, the economic one is where this war really starts to bite everyone else.
Yeah, what's
The Strait of
Iran's
Hormuz,
economic
the choke
situation?
point through which roughly 20 million barrels of oil a day pass, has become the most contested waterway on Earth, and the situation there has involved enough back and forth to make your head spin. What's actually happening here? Unhelpfully, seems to depend on who you ask. The conventional Iranian navy is, by most accounts, gone. American and Israeli strikes have sunk or disabled the bulk of it. But that hasn't translated into safe passage because the assets doing the damage were never the big ships.
Yeah.
IRGC shore-based anti-ship missile batteries along the coast near Bandar Abbas and Qeshm Island are still firing, and swarms of fast-attack speedboats and Shahed-style drones are just about impossible to address with an air campaign alone, given how easily they're disguised into a launch.
Yeah, that's the main issue. It's really just the drones. There's really no way to counter them. Not completely. You would need dozens, if not more, drone teams which are constantly observing the Strait of Hormuz, trying to destroy and counter any drones sent by Iran.
The regime's own messaging on all of this has been unbelievably contradictory, which has only spread further confusion. Mushtaba Khamenei's first public statements, and we use the term statement lightly there, given how much uncertainty surrounds whether he's even alive, declared that, quote, blocking the Strait of Hormuz must undoubtedly continue to be used.
He could just be a figurehead. He's likely already dead, but due to the fact he hasn't been seen publicly, they're trying to say, oh yeah, he's still alive, to try and, I don't know, get some support for their cause.
Indicates that they were going all in on this. Former Minister Aragchi, meanwhile, has been telling a completely different story, quoting, "The Strait of Hormuz is not closed, but it is only closed to American, Israeli ships and tankers."
I mean, that's
and not to
complete
others.
BS.
Now, the fallout economically from this is really quite hard to overstate. Petrol prices worldwide have shot up since the conflict broke out, but the Gulf states are at the front of what stands to be lost. A recent Goldman Sachs stress test published on March 15th showed that if the strait remained effectively closed through April, Qatar and Kuwait could see their full-year GDP contract by 14%, the worst since the 1990 Gulf War. The UAE and Saudi Arabia wouldn't be quite as hard hit, but they'd both take a 5 and 3-point hit respectively. The urgency behind this hasn't exactly translated into a unified international coalition, though, much to the chagrin of Washington. Trump demanded that about 7 countries send warships to help police the strait, then told reporters aboard Air Force One, quote, "Whether we get support or not, we will remember." Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, for his part, captured the mood across much of Europe when he said, "This is not our war. We did not start it." That more or less sums up.
You know, Trump has made many statements about Ukraine, about how the US doesn't need NATO. Now he asks for help from NATO countries and other allies. They deny sending anything. They will not send anything to the Strait of Hormuz to help. And then the very next day, he once again starts yapping about how the US doesn't need NATO. They can do it all on their own. And I saw news about Trump making statements how the US helped a lot with the war in Ukraine. Yeah, the US helped a lot back when Biden was president. Ever since Trump became president, the US has been less of an ally, more of an enemy.
Where the broader European position has been. This was a war the US and Israel started, and it's going to be theirs to finish. south of the Litani. Now, in case all of this isn't enough for you, well, don't worry, because we've got you covered. While all of this...
Now, I do have to say something, just so that people don't misunderstand me. I do agree that NATO countries and other US allies should send their own assets to the Middle East. I 100% believe that they should try and help in ending this war as soon as possible. And that's not going to happen through dialogue, that's going to happen through completely annihilating Iran. So while I do despise Trump, because he's a complete fucking hypocrite and just a piece of shit in general, I do agree that other nations should be helping them to destroy Iran.
This has been going on between the US and Iran. There's been another front raging as well between Israel and
Hezbollah.
Lebanon. We've covered this previously here on Warfronts when the fighting first broke out, which took all of 2 days after the initial strikes on Tehran, and what followed has turned Lebanon into the war's most volatile second front. By March 16th, at least 3 separate IDF divisions were operating simultaneously inside of southern Lebanon, pushing through Qiyam, Bint Jbeil, and Marjion in the most significant ground operations since their 2006 intervention. Evacuation orders are now covering everything south of the Litani, which, when combined with the evacuated areas in the Bekaa Valley and southern Beirut, totals to roughly 14% of the entirety of Lebanon's territory and have driven close to 1 million people from their homes. Israeli Defense Minister Katz has said at least parts of the operation, modeled explicitly on Gaza, offered no timeline for withdrawal, and some ministers are already floating the idea of a semi-permanent security zone. For now, there are no signs of a push toward Beirut or anything beyond the Litani, but that's not to say that calls for exactly such an operation haven't materialized, because they have.
I don't know enough about the history between Israel and Lebanon and the people there, but I know Hezbollah operates from Lebanon. That can't be allowed to continue. Hezbollah is an Iranian-sponsored terrorist organization. If they operate on Lebanon, it's obvious the Lebanese government isn't doing anything to stop that, so if they're not gonna do anything about it, Israel has got to do it themselves.
One senior cabinet
I'm never gonna go against a country that's killing terrorists.
official has gone so far as to call for Beirut's southern suburbs to be turned into Khan Yunis. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun's response to this has been the most striking thing to come out of Beirut in years, honestly. In the last 48 hours alone, he's publicly called Hezbollah's decision to enter the war a trap and an almost overt ambush serving Iranian interests, warned that the country
why is
on the
Hezbollah
path
in your
to become a
country?
second Gaza, and floated a 4-point plan calling for an immediate ceasefire, international backing for the Lebanese armed forces to oversee disarmament, direct negotiations with Israel, and long-term border security agreements. While all of this is unprecedented for a Lebanese president, Beirut is currently falling short of Israeli expectations for 2 reasons. First, Lebanon has a long history of promising to finally get tough on Hezbollah
And they never did.
hasn't exactly materialized. Second, and more pertinently, the LAF is already struggling to implement the ban on Hezbollah's military operations that we reported on just a week ago.
See, this is what I'm talking about. If they're not gonna do it, someone has to. I don't fully support Israel's ground invasion, but at the same time, Lebanon obviously isn't gonna get rid of Hezbollah. So Israel has to do it themselves. It's like they say, if you want something done right, do it yourself.
Hezbollah's attack was earth-shattering for Beirut, which appeared to have finally found a moment of cross-sectarian agreement that Hezbollah simply had to go. And while there were initially promising signs that the LAF was taking this seriously, the army has largely stalled. LAF commander Haykal has essentially refused to enforce the government's ban on Hezbollah's military activities, and the United States has even suspended some coordination with the LAF over it. The country's prime minister has considered firing him for the whole debacle. Now look, in fairness to Haykal,
Good, he
this
should be.
isn't just some random
He looks like a
act of
fucking Iranian
indifference where
sympathizer.
he'd rather sit around and watch war fronts and go out and disarm the group, though we couldn't blame him if that was the case, could we? Rather, his calculation is that 20 to 30% of the LAF are Shia and would possibly refuse to mobilize against Hezbollah entirely, risking a total fracture of the military. Keep in mind that in Lebanon,
well then,
sectarian identity
looks like
is front
Israel's
and
gonna have
center
to do
just
it
about
themselves.
everything that happens, especially in politics, and the LAF is broadly considered to be the last cross-sectarian institution in the country. All that said, the inaction here is seriously jeopardizing the country's sovereignty. The lesson that Israel took away from the October 7th attacks, rightly or wrongly, was that they couldn't afford to allow a hostile force to exist along its borders anymore. In the aftermath of the 2024 ceasefire with Lebanon, Israel made it clear that disarmament of the group was an absolute bare minimum condition, and the
As it
tragic
should
thing
be.
is that the LAF largely delivered on this. Earlier this year, they completed phase 1 of the operation, and while it was slow going, potentially so slow that Hezbollah was actually rearming faster elsewhere in the country than it was being disarmed, the LAF nevertheless demonstrated that it could deliver. And all of this isn't helped by the fact that even today, right now, Hezbollah continues to launch on Israel. While their stockpile has been severely reduced and seems likely to be further reduced in their ongoing clashes with the IDF, they don't appear to be anywhere close to surrender. And that is where we'll leave it today. But trust us, there will be plenty more to come as the situation continues to develop. And thank you for watching.
I do wonder how this is going to affect Iran economically in the long run. Because eventually, if destroying them militarily won't be enough, then it's time to destroy all of their oil. Destroy all of their export terminals, all of their oil fields, just destroy all of it. Completely destroy any possibility of Iran exporting any oil. I highly doubt the other Gulf nations would be against this, because that just means more people would buy from them. It would increase their profits. Yeah, I mean, we'll see how the situation continues. I personally believe that Iran, the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, all of it has to go completely. But anyway, that's enough for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you want to see more reactions, check out this video right here. And with that, I hope I'll see you in the next video.